Everybody, good morning. Thanks for joining us as we sort out the results of Tuesday's election. I'm Andrew Junius, and I chair BOMA San Francisco's Political Action Committee. First and foremost, let me thank the BOMA PAC for hosting today's discussion. The PAC is always engaged in local and state political affairs. We rely on voluntary contributions from our members to do important business. So when you get your 2021 BOMA dues in the coming weeks, please consider sending us the suggested minimum voluntary donation to the PAC. It's not a lot of money compared to your regular dues. And of course, a well-funded PAC is critical to our advocacy success. Let me first, before we get into the program, thank the two companies sponsoring today's program, along with my own law firm, Rubin, Junius & Rose. First, thanks to Allhouse Deaton, a multifaceted real estate company with over 50 years of experience in property management, investment, and development in San Francisco's Bay Area. Core services include property operations, financial management, capital improvements, tenant improvements, and marketing. Allhouse Deaton's Regional Director, Shana Eskew, chairs BOMA's Government Affairs Policy Advisory Committee, the infamous GAP PAC, and we always appreciate Shana's input. Thank you as well to Seagate Properties, a creative real estate investment company committed to recognizing potential and maximizing the value of its people and its investments. Services include acquisition, disposition, investment, property management, development and entitlements, leasing, and receivership. Seagate's General Manager, Bonnie Kalbrowski, chairs BOMA's Emergency Preparedness Committee. And rounding out our sponsors today is my own law firm of Rubin, Junius & Rose. We counsel and represent clients in all facets of real estate law, with special emphasis on real estate transactions and land use planning and zoning. We're especially proud of the trust, friendship, and confidence we have earned, as evidenced by our long-standing relationships with many clients. Now onto our program. It's my pleasure to introduce Alex Clemens, co-founder and managing member of Lighthouse Public Affairs, and a very good friend of mine as well. He's a veteran political operative and communications expert who has served for four elected officials in San Francisco and Washington, D.C. In 2003, Alex founded Barbary Coast Consulting, which the New York Times named as an elite public affairs firm. And in 2016, Alex joined forces with Rich Peterson and Bo Hayward to combine their firms and create and co-found Lighthouse Public Affairs. Alex has been involved for over 2 decades in negotiations surrounding San Francisco's favorite political pastime, debating the location, height, and density of land use projects. So Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you in a second. For some reason, it's been hard for me to tear my eyes away from the national situation, so I finally looked at the local and state stuff last night, and I know you've been looking at it since Tuesday. We look forward to hearing from you, and take it away, Alex.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everybody. I am going to speed through a general overview of some data regarding San Francisco, state, and well, pretty much that. The election results, so that we have a fundamental understanding of a shared piece of information about what the data looks like as it stands right now. And I'll take a second to share my screen, which may require some fancy dancing. All right, and Andrew, I'm going to ask you if a PowerPoint presentation, I'm on the wrong end of it. Technical difficulties, call IT.
That would be Sylvia.
No.
I can see it.
I'm gonna get back there. Okay, this is where we're supposed to start.
Yeah.
This is primarily a San Francisco election recap. There are 61,000 uncounted votes at the Registrar of Voters office that will change the results. There are only a couple races where they might actually affect the outcome. Most of the races are sealed. So a quick run through. On the state level, we can get into each of these in detail later on, but stem cell research bonds look like they are likely to narrowly pass. The commercial property tax raise is not looking good. For some reason, Californians got confused about what the affirmative action fight was a long time ago and decided not to undo what Ward Connerly and others did a million years back. While we don't trust our teenagers to vote, it's probably okay if you've done your time. The property tax breaks measure is getting through. Criminal penalties are not particularly ripe for expansion in the year 2020. The second round of statewide rent control reform went down in flames. $200 million in spending can absolutely get you something positive in the state of California. I would forecast that 2 and 5 and 6 years from now, we will see rounds 3, 4, and 5 of the remarkably niche dialysis clinic doctor requirement ballot fight, because everyone deserves to have a good laugh when they open up their ballot. The one-man crusade to increase voter privacy succeeded, and the attempt to eliminate cash bail failed, which was interesting. There were some divergences in how we looked at criminal justice issues this year. Federally, obviously, the Senate's going to stay in Republican hands unless both Perdue and Loeffler go down in Florida in the January runoffs, which is unlikely, despite the fact that this morning you probably have heard that the Biden campaign has gone ahead in Georgia. It will be a lower turnout race in January, but I assume that the correct thing to do right now is, if you're able to buy a small television station somewhere in Metro Atlanta, because you will be basically holding the phone up to your ear and having political ad buyers take all of your time. You don't need to actually have any programming now. You can just run ads 24/7. The House of Representatives will remain under Democratic control, though the expansion of the House was not what came to pass, and there are already discussions about whether the Democratic Congressional Committee and Speaker Pelosi underperformed in a way that is going to create some level of revolt. Speaking of revolt or revolting things, there are a few states that are still outstanding in terms of how the final votes will fall, though it is clear at this point that one of the two men running for president has a pathway to 270 plus electoral votes and the other one does not. If you have not watched the 16 minutes of President Trump standing in the White House press room last night and lying without evidence about fundamental democratic principles being corrupted by imaginary enemies, which does not hold true, given that, gosh, a lot of Republicans seem to have done just fine. It's just he that lost. I would highly commend it to you. I'd encourage you to have some bourbon or heroin somewhere nearby to get yourself through it. And if you are interested in helping make sure that this man, who is utterly without the ability to graciously concede defeat and may use every tactic and tool available to him to fight it, if you're interested in battling back, I would encourage you to go to protecttheresults.com, which is a joint effort of many different organizations that seek to see every ballot in the United States counted and to make sure that the will of the people is put in place. But enough preaching from me. San Francisco, easy primer, just like the state level. We're not quite sure that our teenagers have it together enough to vote, but everything else got passed, including, importantly, Prop RR, which saves Caltrain. The margin could not be narrower in Santa Clara County. As of this morning, it is at 66.8% of the 66.7% that it needs in each of the three counties. It's important to remember that. If San Francisco and San Mateo pass it at 100%, but Santa Clara comes in at 65%, the entire thing topples over. So fingernails are being eaten because the trend since Tuesday night in Santa Clara has been a slight edging down from 67.4% down to 66.8%. Most of the ballots are counted, but not all of them. So that one is suddenly back in the margin of, oh crap, for those of you who, like me, are train fans. The election was not particularly an uproarious one in San Francisco. There are a lot of bread and butter issues that were on the ballot. And again, all of them passed. We can get into the details of these, but more interesting are, of course, the candidate races. The only one with huge amounts of controversy was the state Senate race, where Scott Wiener ran as if he was an underdog, which is the correct way to run always. But he solidly defeated young upstart Jackie Fielder, who is now a 26-year-old who has a probably strong future in San Francisco politics. She was a compelling candidate and did a fine job. Not enough to beat one of San Francisco's most savvy and veteran politicians, however. Nancy Pelosi and Jackie Speer in the Congress, David Chu and Phil Ting in the Assembly. Latifah Simon and Bevan Dufty at BART and Hillary Ronan in District 9 all won over token or no opposition. In District 3, Aaron Peskin had his worst showing, but still outpaced the entire rest of the San Francisco field, except for Hillary Ronan, of course, who ran without opposition, pulling in just about 55% of the vote against Danny Sauter, who many people believed was setting himself up to be a leading candidate to run for the District 3 seat in 4 years when Peskin is once again termed out from office, as he was, I believe, 10 years ago. District 5, Dean Preston, who has been in office for a year, prevailed in his rematch against Valley Brown, his appointed predecessor. You'll probably recall that last year they faced off, and in a slightly tighter race than this, Dean Preston defeated Valley Brown. With the advent of COVID and financial restraints, Brown saw an opportunity to return to the board. The voters did not agree with her. In District 11, Asha Safai easily defeated former supervisor and his predecessor, John Avalos, in a not particularly close rematch. There are two races that are of distinct interest. We'll get to those last. Let me skip down to the Board of Education. We know who the first three people are who will be on the board. Jenny Lamb and Mark Sanchez will return. Newcomer Kevin Bogus will be on the Board of Education, and either Matt Alexander or Alita Fisher, depending on how the votes fall. Probably Alexander, as most of them are counted at this point. This is not a ranked choice voting race. There is no redistribution of votes. On the College Board, Chanel Williams and Tom Temprano, who are both incumbents, will return to the board. It is most likely at this point that Alia Chisti and Alan Wong are going to be the newly elected members of the College Board. Two incumbents chose not to run for office. The list of others who ran is down below. Finally, the two competitive races in San Francisco. Let's go with District 1 first, again, out of order. Connie Chan and Marjan Philhauer were the two leading candidates. There were 7 candidates in this race. David Lee was the only other one to break into double digits. After ranked choice voting, we have essentially a tie right now. Marjan Philhauer is holding a slight lead, but of under 100 votes right now. We'll get into the details of that in a moment. But the most interesting race was in District 7 to succeed current board president Norman Yee, one of San Francisco's two most conservative, and I am using quote marks with my fingers, even though you can't see them, I think. Conservative in San Francisco still means you would be burned as a witch in Indiana. So let's put it all in perspective. But in one of San Francisco's two most conservative districts, the most conservative candidate did not win. He did come in first place votes, which is what you see here. 24% is the first place votes before redistribution happens. Velasco Wynn, a public defender, was in second, bunched closely with former planning commissioner Myrna Melgar, whose name is highlighted because she won this, even though she came in third, because ranked choice voting is cool. And let's go and explore that a little bit more. In District 1, we see when David Lee falls out of the race, an essential tie between Connie Chan, a slight lead by Connie Chan over Marjan Philhauer reverses because the transference of votes did not go as Chan and Lee hoped for. They announced a vote for me first and my friend over here second strategy, the 1-2 strategy, about a week before the election. Had they done this a couple months before the election, perhaps it would have been more effective. But the transference of votes suggested by the candidates did not follow, and Marjan Philhauer is receiving a slightly disproportionately larger percentage of David Lee's votes, which has vaulted her into a bare lead over Connie Chan. If I were to bet right now, I would bet that Marjan Philhauer was going to prevail in this race. However, they are counting votes in a rather mysterious fashion, given the fact that everyone mailed in their votes this year, pretty much. And I'm unclear whether the traditional demographic, more progressive, more conservative votes, again, San Francisco conservative, will fall earlier or later in the process. So this one is still too close to call. District 7, again, fascinating. As you can see in round 4, Velasco Wynn and Myrna Melgar are in a near tie with Joel Engardio with a significant lead ahead of them. But when Emily Murase, who is a former elected official in San Francisco's votes, were retransferred because she was in last place amongst surviving candidates. Her votes disproportionately went to her fellow woman of color in the race. And in round 5, you will see that Myrna Melgar opened up a wider lead over Velasca Wynn. And given that Joel Engardio, along with 2 candidates who were eliminated early in the polling, were regarded as the more moderate candidates in the race, and Velasca Wynn and Myrna Melgar were seen as the more progressive candidates in the race, there was a strong vote transfer when Wynn dropped out. And as you'll see, Melgar easily vaulted over where Engardio was with the transference of votes and is declared the winner. This is the second time in San Francisco history that someone who was in 3rd place in the initial round of voting wound up winning a seat. And that the first time that happened was in 2010 when Malia Cohen became a member of the Board of Supervisors. Her race still is far more interesting for 2 reasons. One, Andrew will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 836 people ran for supervisor. Actually, I think there were truly 19 candidates on the ballot, so they were much more closely clustered together. And the final 2 people standing started out with the 3rd and 4th most votes in the initial rounds of balloting. The people who were in 1st and 2nd had fallen along the way. So that's the quick overview. We can jump back to this, but I'm going to get out of screen sharing so we can stop looking at numbers. I'm going to try to get out of screen sharing. There we go. I hope this works. Stop that. There we are again.
Hey, Alex,
all right.
Nice job. Appreciate it. I'll start with a few of my questions, just some clarification. So the difference between why we have a result in D7 and no result in D1 is simply because D1 is too close and there's still ballots to be counted?
Yeah, 60,000 ballots citywide, more or less, remain at the Registrar of Voters office. And the margin of 100 votes is simply too small for anybody to declare a victory there. In District 7, I think we've got about 2,000 votes separating 1st and 2nd after RCV happens, and no tricks in the RCV that would result in Melgar being eliminated before Velasca Wynn. However, I will predict that if something statistically very strange happens and in round 4 somehow, or round 5, somehow Velasca Wynn overtakes Myrna Melgar, Joel Engardio still won't be elected as supervisor. Velasca Wynn will. It is an odd component of what we do, though RCV is expanding throughout the country. Many of you may know that in the main Senate race, RCV is in play there as well. When you don't have someone scoring 50% or more in the 1st round, the candidate in last place is eliminated and the votes are redistributed until someone does pass the 50% plus 1 barrier.
And you're not, and those 61,000 outstanding votes, you don't think are going to change any of the results on the measures, do you? There are a few close ones, but not really.
The only one that's really within the margin in San Francisco is whether or not our 16 and 17-year-olds are allowed to vote in certain elections.
Right. Okay. And at the state level, I mean, I thought I was still seeing like tons of ballots still out, right? I mean, when does the state finally finish counting, you think?
I don't have an answer on when it will finish counting. I do have, I got something recently, but I can't find it quickly in my email. There are 4.5 million ballots outstanding as of last night at 7:30 p.m. I imagine that number has come down substantially because most registrars are no longer in the logistical collecting process and are in the processing process, but I don't have an understanding of where those numbers are. I will say that the numbers on the state level have moved as much as 0.75 percentage point from Tuesday night's results to Friday morning, or really Thursday afternoon's results. Those are the latest numbers I have. There is still a possibility that some of them could shift. We can go back and look at those numbers. I mean, anything that's between 51 and 49% at this point, I certainly wouldn't call with any certainty, though the trends, my understanding is geographically, the first round of votes have come in from just about everywhere. So it's not as if we're waiting on San Diego or Tulare or Fresno. The votes are generally in, and now it's the more complex votes, the provisional votes, the challenged votes, the late arriving absentee ballots, and so on. This is the first time California has sent out a vote by mail ballot to everyone in the state, because Gavin Newsom, I believe, wisely decided that everyone should have that option, whether they asked to have that option or not. And there is a pandemic going on, which none of us have heard much about for the last 3 days, but Again, yesterday, 1,600 people across our country died of coronavirus. Actually, probably more than that because of comorbidity factors. We had the most people in the history of coronavirus come down with a new infection yesterday, and those numbers will continue to go up. Now, here's a PSA. Flu shots are available pretty much everywhere. And even if your insurance company is telling you you got to go through a dance to do it, drop into a CVS, it's $35, and you can feel like a patriot and not accidentally kill your grandma.
Yeah, good advice, Alex. At the in terms of just again local and state, there were really no issues with voting, right? We didn't have any claim. I mean, there was that weird story down in SoCal about Republicans stealing ballot boxes or putting out fake ballot boxes. Again, California, no issues with voting. It's going to take a while, but no real problems at all.
The few things that I have seen that have been reported out by mainstream media have been indications of extremely clumsy counter programming where you attempt to make it look like the other side is doing something sneaky with the ballots. I am actually surprised. I think I am even shocked that there wasn't better monkey wrenching that went on by partisan political folks, because convincing somebody that the other side is stealing votes isn't that hard. The president is trying to do it right now. One would think that they would have come up with some clever operative somewhere to actually create some video that wasn't obviously doctored, which has been popping up all over the place. But no, our election process in the United States of America does not appear to be shot through with fraud. You have Republicans and Democrats as secretaries of state and governors around the country. They count the votes. They have processes in place. And there are some people, almost all, just not the president, who believe that some of the issues of sanctity of our democratic process and the underlying foundations that prop it up are worth protecting.
An amazing concept, I hear you. Okay, let's dig a little deeper into the. I think there are some interesting comparisons between D1 and D7. I'd love your thoughts here. So you had, in a way, you had kind of, they're very different neighborhoods, of course, and individually very different candidates, but you can kind of put them in the same box in some ways, from my perspective. They were both. They both run before. They both, been.
Actually, let's just for those people on the call who are slightly less nerdy than you and I, which I'm just going to go ahead and say that's everybody. District 1 is the Richmond district writ large. District 7 is a bit more complicated. It's the lower left-hand corner of San Francisco, west of Twin Peaks, and that area, St. Francis Wood, a lot of single-family homes,
West Portal, exactly,
some of the Excelsior, yeah. So geographically, that's what we're talking about. And sorry to interrupt. I just wanted for the 80% of the people who aren't nerds like we are. Yeah,
I hear you. So in the two, you had these two very interesting moderate candidates. You have Marjan, who looks like she's, really got a good chance, and you got Joel, who's been, eliminated. They were two open seats. They were two candidates that had spent literally, the last 4 years or more building a name in their neighborhood, working hard. I mean, I'm impressed with both candidates, and we actually had both candidates on one of our panels a few months ago. It's still just amazing to me that a guy like Joel can't get across the finish line. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
This is Joel's third run. And if you took Joel's 3 run, I know Joel a little bit personally. I like him. He is a bright, engaging guy, a tremendous amount of energy, a great love for the city. But if you took his 3 races and the positions he espoused in the 3 races, they don't line up with 100% consistency. He has somewhat reshaped his platform to fit the issues of the day. He is a crime fighter at this point, and was more of a small business neighborhood guy in his last race. And the first race, I'm not recollecting his exact platform. He certainly had his best showing this year, but he is in a district that is perplexing and complex. So let's review the bidding here. Norman Yee has represented this district for the past 8 years. Norman Yee was elected to be president of the Board of Supervisors with progressive votes. Norman Yee is a progressive member of the Board of Supervisors, and District 7 ain't. The previous occupant of this seat was a guy named Sean Ellsburn, who is a old school, old San Francisco guy who is currently chief of staff to Mayor London Breed and was always the most hardcore fiscal hawk on the Board of Supervisors. Before him, Tony Hall, who was elected in the 2000 uprising against Willie Brown by saying Willie Brown and his lefty buddies on the Board of Supervisors are ruining San Francisco. This district has been hard right, again, for San Francisco, burned its witches in Indiana, et cetera, for the 16 years before Norman Yee showed up. And Norman Yee was by no stretch of the imagination the candidate who best fit that district. 8 years ago, when he first ran, FX Crowley and Mike Garcia, boy, we're getting specific here, were two different representatives of the old school, moderate San Francisco that District 7 really exemplifies at its core. But they refused to, one of them offered to the other one, you want to do that 1-2 thing? And the one who said, I'm not going to name names, but the one who said, no, thank you, I'm not interested, actually finished just behind Norman Yee. And had there been a 2-month consolidated effort to do a 1-2 strategy, that man would have been a member of the Board of Supervisors for 8 years. Instead, Norman wound up winning, getting reelected 4 years ago against Ben Matranga, and I think Joel ran 4 years ago. Joel definitely ran 8 years ago. The outcome in 7 is interesting. It should be, for San Francisco moderates, a flippable district. I will say, Myrna Melgar is a remarkably appealing candidate. She can have a conversation with anybody and you will walk away and say, I may disagree with her on a couple of those things, but she's smart and she's reasonable and she's experienced. She was a planning commission member and president for quite some time, breaking the streak of many members of the San Francisco Planning Commission who decided that was their ticket to the Board of Supervisors and found out they were incorrect. Myrna will bring much needed land use knowledge and depth and granularity to the Board of Supervisors, where there are, aside from Aaron Peskin, a lot of people who think they know exactly what they're talking about and may not be completely correct about that. By the way, this is hilarious. I'm hanging up, Andrew, on Daniel Fratton, who is calling me right now. That's another colleague of yours at the estimable firm of Rubin, Junius, and Rhodes. See how I got that in there again? You're welcome. Send me $5. So I don't know what the winning combination is for Joel Engardio in District 7. And I think after 3 attempts at the seat, it's probably not his, 4 or 8 years from now. But it is a seat where someone who is much more moderately inclined and based should be picking up one of San Francisco's few available moderate possibilities. In District 1, Marjan Filhauer is like Melgar, remarkably compelling candidate. Both she and Connie Chan have their strengths as candidates. Marjan is a well-seasoned, long-term political aide at the state level and in San Francisco. Most recently, she was senior advisor to Mayor London Breed. She ran 4 years ago against Sandra Lee Fewer and finished a close second in that race. Marjan should be in District 1, which does have a strong Chinese residency. And I think that there are some people who are much more likely to vote for the candidate who matches up with them on an ethnic basis. But it is a much more, in San Francisco, we have a variety of areas where a moderate's never going to win. District 1 is the place where a moderate certainly could, but they haven't broken through since district elections returned in 2000. And it is both 1 and 7 should be those places, along with District 2, where moderates have the best shot of breaking through. And it will be interesting to see if Marjan breaks that streak in District 1.
Yep, I hear you. I mean, and if she does, then we, incumbents usually win. So we could be in for 8 years of Marjan, which would be pretty cool. And that may change the dynamic long-term for D1.
Andrew, I don't know if you know, this is not a setup, but since 2000, since district elections came back in, how many incumbents who won their seat, and were not appointed first, but won their seat, were defeated when they ran for re-election since 2000? So every 2 years since then, we've had 5 or 6 people in that position. How many?
It's a very small number. It might be 1 or 0 or.
It's that second one. Nobody who has run for re-election as an elected supervisor has lost.
Yep.
Which in San Francisco, which has a remarkable bench of talented people who are prepping themselves for runs for office, that is a remarkable statistic, and it really underscores the power of incumbency.
Okay, I'm looking through some questions. So if you've got questions for Alex, please put them in the Q&A box. I've got a few here. Stand
Especially if you got questions for Andrew, put them in the Q&A box as well, because he's smarter than I am.
An observation that Ed Ju actually was tell the Ed Ju story again. That's a bizarre one. Remind us of what happened there before he went to jail.
Chris Wright, oh, he went to jail. Great, fine, totally. Bury the lead. Why don't you? Chris Wright, who is wise and wiser than I in many ways, and probably should be in this spot right now, asked that or posited that Ed Ju was behind. I think he was, but I thought he was in second rather than third. There have been several people who've been in second who vaulted over the first place. It's much rarer to have somebody in third place. So Chris, if you know that he was in third, throw that back in there because that'll educate me. Ed Ju was the gentleman who succeeded Leland Yee when Leland Yee ran for and won a state in the California State Senate. Hilariously, that was 2 consecutive members of the District 4 seat in San Francisco who managed to get themselves some federally funded housing that they weren't allowed to leave. Leland Yee tried to sell some imaginary rocket launchers to an FBI agent because he thought that was a good idea on some Wednesday. And Ed Ju accepted a bunch of money as bribes to help entitle a bubble tea cafe because in San Francisco, our corruption has to be enormously specific. Otherwise, we're not interested in that run of the mill, just envelope of money for being a good guy. Hold on, Chris, are you? I'm gonna get back in here and see. Districts will change with redistricting. No, yes, we are going to do our every 10-year food fight coming up on San Francisco's districts, which generally involves. So just like national redistricting or state level redistricting for assembly districts and congressional redistricting, if a state's population has grown enough or shrunk enough that it deserves one more or one less of the 435 House seats. I would like to do something about Wyoming's 2 Senate seats. That still doesn't seem fair to me, but then again, I'm not a white landowner in the 1700s who wanted to keep everything to myself. We are going to do redistricting in San Francisco. That will be a whole bunch of fights around the margins. We're supposed to keep neighborhoods of interest intact, and you can't gerrymander in San Francisco because we have good rules here. All districts have to be within, I believe, 5% of each other in population, and you have to keep neighborhood precincts intact. You can't cut a line down the middle. But where the real fun happens is there will literally be dozens, if not hundreds of hours of public testimony about why this particular precinct should remain in this district and or be moved to that particular district. Not so much because it's a really important block that fits better with that one or that one, but someone who's planning to run for supervisor in the next 10 years lives in that precinct. And truly, if I could peel back the amount of BS public comment that is based on that one issue, we could save so much time as a city. Chris, can you put together a ballot initiative to, just create some AI that will do this, that will ignore who lives where and just make it happen, right? Please, you're smart enough to program that.
Hey, Alex, let's talk a little bit about, not a very exciting race, but were you surprised in D11 that Asha, there was really no competition there? Is Avalos's political career done at this point from a electoral standpoint?
Possibly, but I don't tend to count people out. Asha Safai will be term limited out at the end of this 4-year term, and the bench in District 11 is not as strong as it is elsewhere. I could see, even though he lost this year, Avalos making another run for it in 4 years. Again, in San Francisco, you can serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms, which is why Aaron Peskin is back on the Board of Supervisors, running in his 8 plus
300th
5. Yeah, something like that. So as long as you sit out a cycle, you're allowed to return to the fray. John is a good retail politician, and I think he, more than many other people, were hampered by the COVID pandemic because getting out and pressing the flesh is just idiotic in the year 2020. Additionally, I think in that race, people who were who were undecided and generally want to, give the benefit of the doubt to the good progressives who are fighting the fight for the people, were given permission by folks like Aaron Peskin, who are solidly progressive in San Francisco, who endorsed Asha Safai for re-election. John over his old colleague John Avalos. So I didn't see this race as being particularly close. I certainly didn't predict it, but when I saw the first results night of basically a 50-40 split, I was like, yeah, that's about right. I would have frankly expected Asha to be at 55 or north. But in San Francisco, everybody hates everybody. And on election night,
Right.
basically you want to get through it and win, and then people slowly, the numbers will fade from their memory, and they're just like,
Yeah.
what do you call the person who finished absolutely last in her medical school class? Doctor.
There you go. Excellent. I mean, overall, though, ranked choice voting seems to be fully accepted in San Francisco now. It's never going away at this point, right? This is what we got, where everybody's starting to understand it. And
people still gripe about it and groan about it. It's growing nationally. It's popping up in places where, if anybody had said we're going to have RCV in a Maine senatorial race, I think people would have been like, yeah, so you opened a cannabis store and you're sampling all your wares. But there it is. RCV, much like people have said, democracy is the worst form of government aside from all of the other ones.
Right.
I think that there is an argument to be made. If you do true RCV, if there are 11 candidates in a race, you should be able to rank them from 1 to 10. Truly, you'll have to explain it to a bunch of dumb people as to why you can't rank them 1 to 11, even though it works. So rank them 1 to 11 and put that on your ballot. It frankly does encourage a more polite and collaborative form of campaigning, because you want people who are voting for somebody else to rank you as their second or third or fourth candidate. So rather than torching the other person, looking for common ground is a good thing. That was one of the original points that people made of why we should have ranked choice voting. I think that while there are people who still moan about it and want it to go away, I don't see a popular revolt rising about actually putting the time and money and energy, but mostly money, into taking it out, especially because the year 2020 has crystallized our focus as a city and a nation and perhaps a world on like the 3 or 4 things we really all need to pay attention to, like climate change and institutional racism and getting people who lie all the time out of office. There's not a whole lot of room for other stuff right now. So if we are going to take out RCV, it's probably a cycle or 4 away.
Right. I hear you. Cool. And and we are going to be shown the non-RCV process in Georgia over the next 3 months, as they have, 2 of the most fought over, 2 runoffs that are just going to drive the entire country crazy.
As I've joked to other people before, the wisest investment you could make right now is to purchase a smaller TV station somewhere in Metro Atlanta and just pick up the phone and hold it by your ear and write down the amounts of money people are sending you to run ads for the next 2 months, because it will be hundreds of millions of dollars.
Incredible.
This is potentially existential. I don't think anybody thinks, hey, it's going to be easy for the Democrats, or possible, frankly, for the Democrats to win both of those seats. But that gets us to a 50-50 tie. So if the Democratic Party as a whole wants to accomplish anything in the next 2 years of the Biden-Harris administration, they cannot let Mitch McConnell bottle everything up. Think about it. Joe Biden says, I want Andrew Junius to be my Secretary of Transportation. Mitch McConnell's opening bid is no.
Exactly.
And he can do that, and Biden can name you acting Secretary of Transportation, but in order for any Senate confirmation to go through, if Mitch McConnell holds 51 or 52 seats, and Mitt Romney doesn't grow a spine, and it would be really lovely if some members of the GOP Senate decided that they were going to be independent thinkers. That would be great. But the Democrats lost a perhaps generational opportunity to reshape the Senate. And unless they can pull 2 rabbits out of a very small hat in Georgia on January 5th, Mitch McConnell still holds all the cards. And he is, I have great admiration for the strategic and tactical ability of Nancy Pelosi to marshal her forces. And it may be second in comparison to Mitch McConnell's ability to marshal and hold his.
Yep, I hear you. Okay, let's start moving on to the quick rundown of some of these measures. Generally speaking, no real surprises on the tax stuff, right? A lot of money was spent, a lot of hope was there, but the way the way it was positioned, apparently the arguments, against taxing our way out of a crisis didn't work. General thoughts before we talk about a few of them specifically?
No, this is San Francisco, and there's an emergency, and the mayor proposed them, and it set up a pretty rough mayor chamber of commerce fight. The chamber battled valiantly and came up short in all instances. All the rules are out the door in the pandemic, all of them. And I was unsurprised by how this turned out. I think that we've been trained in San Francisco to understand that developers and businesses have a magic cash machine in the back of their shops and can just go roll it a few more times and deliver some more money to the city so that we can have a muni bus. And a lot of people were making just fundamental decisions about what team they wanted to play on right now and who they wanted to fund, and the tax measures got through. Yeah. Not in a particularly close fashion either.
Exactly. That was even more discouraging. The interesting ballot measure that that split up the Department of Public Works, the Matt Haney thing that was pushed. Was this a vote against corruption and Mohammed issues, or was there actually more about street cleaning and day-to-day stuff, or a little bit of both?
Yes, yes,
yes,
it was.
Yes.
So let's see, that one passed at 61, so 61-39. If this had been on the ballot a year ago, before the DPW scandals and the FBI climbing all over everybody in San Francisco, it would have passed, because there are still zero San Franciscans who stroll down Market Street and are like, golly, I could eat an egg off of this. So the fact that it was catapulted to everyone's consciousness, because all of us have thought during some phone call in the last year, and have probably been right, I wonder if somebody else is listening to this, and they probably have been. That is important in the overall structure of things. But I still think this would have passed 55 plus if it had been put on the ballot before any of the corruption stuff had happened, frankly.
Yeah, I hear you. Interesting question from Mark. Mark's asking the basic question, obviously the anti-tax messages just had no legs this time with the local voters. Do you think it would have been different if Trump wasn't on the ballot?
Ooh, I don't. Andrew, do you think this would have been different if Trump hadn't been on the ballot? I hadn't contemplated that.
Yeah. Well, turn out and say, I mean, San Francisco is such a blue city anyway. Probably not. Yeah. Who knows?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I don't think Trump changes how people vote locally, because the entire Trump vote in San Francisco was relatively de minimis. Hey, Visitation Valley, I hear you turned out 25% for Donald Trump. Guys,
Yeah.
what? Look, we all have Trump people in our orbit, and that's great. And I hope they're voting for Trump for just solely pocketbook issues, and they actually haven't seen how he behaves, because if they had seen how he behaves and they did it anyway, it'd be troubling. But I don't think Trump motivates San Franciscans to go vote for other stuff. I think he may get them to the polls so they can pull the lever no in his general direction, but I don't know that there's any fall through on the ballot.
Right. Statewide, jumping up to the two biggies for the real estate industry, split roll and Costa-Hawkins. It looks like they're both losing, which is probably the only good news we have today, maybe except for Marjan's hopeful win. I think in your opening remarks you mentioned that you don't think they're coming back anytime soon. I mean, this really was, for the Costa-Hawkins at least, the second time in 2 elections. I mean, back to back, right?
No, I'm sorry if I said that. I was conflating various things. I was trying to make the dumb joke about dialysis going to be on every ballot until we're dead, possibly for kidney failure at that point. I do think that there are going to be continued attempts to chip away at Prop 13 for a variety of reasons from a variety of stakeholders. Prop 13 was probably the most important, I'm going to get in trouble with somebody, certainly the most important fiscal initiative that California voters have passed, probably full stop period, in the history of California, though I'm sure there was something back in 1929 about Hatch-Hatchie or infrastructure that someone will appropriately reprimand me for. But that fundamentally changed everything, from how much it costs you to live somewhere, to how we move around or choose not to how our schools are funded or are not, to the growing urban and rural divide. It permeates everything. And when you have something that is that fundamental to the makeup of the seventh largest nation in the world, which is what we are, I do believe that there will be continued efforts, and what they will look like and how they will be constituted should be left to smarter people than I. But there are lots of folks who are interested in reforming it, changing it, throwing it out the window altogether. And somebody's going to unlock a message that's going to be more resonant at some point because of some circumstance. And again, if I wanted to get rich really quickly, I would spend all of my time trying to figure out what that was, right? Because these initiatives at the state level are super fun. Note to self: next life, run statewide media campaigns with a 15% ad buy margin. Got it. Okay, sorry, where were we?
You feel the same way about the rent control? Is that going to be back over and over and over again?
Michael Weinstein has a lot of money and is pretty single-minded, and my sense is that will continue to be an issue. And perhaps the changes in California, I mean, there's going to be some fascinating data that I don't think we've gotten our hands on yet. What is the population drop in San Francisco? We don't know that yet. We can extrapolate some ideas from what the changing rent requests on Craigslist are and how many free months of rent are being offered at various places. You can make some broad extrapolations, but it's guesses at this point. I would like to find out how the average age in San Francisco has gone up because of the number of people who are youths have gone somewhere cheaper, which, by the way, somewhere cheaper is like legitimately anywhere. I would like to find out what if I had a crystal ball and could look 4 years from now at what downtown looks like, we could make some remarkably smart bets about where the world's going to be. And I don't know. There are good arguments to be made that it's fundamentally changed and it's not coming back in the way it was. There are arguments to be made that absolutely that was the way it was for a reason, and people are going to get back to that as quickly as possible. But I think the long-term question of how we do stuff as a society is on the table, because for the past 6 months, those people who have been able to work from home have done it. And generally those people and those industries have not fallen apart completely. Everybody suffered some from this, but I would assume that most of the people who are on this particular webinar are employed, and still employed relatively similarly to the way they were before. Because my company keeps getting called by people who need us to do stuff. Andrew Junius is still getting calls from people who need good land use lawyering. Things didn't stop, even though we were all working from weird new places. And so maybe those commutes weren't so great after all, right? But I also miss seeing people in all three dimensions. I don't want to catch COVID from them, but I'd like to go give Andrew a hug and like laugh my ass off at a football game at some point with him while sharing a beer, because that's better than this. That is fundamentally better than this. And we get a lot of that from our offices and our community, and we choose to work where we work, partially because of the work we get to do, but substantially because of the whom we get to work with, even though we're not supposed to end sentences and prepositions. So I think that there will be a continued revisitation of lots of things. And getting back to rent control, which is a long way from where we are here, like Prop 13, how much we pay for where we live is a fundamental foundational issue in where we wind up going and what our traffic patterns are and how we are in our communities. I think Michael Weinstein will figure out at some point that he needs to not be the face and the sole funder of these things, and maybe to widen his umbrella and let some other people in. My understanding of this gentleman, who I have not met, is that he might be a tiny bit dictatorial in his outlook of how he does things, and he's right and other people are wrong. And even though his two initiatives haven't gotten through the way he wanted them to, just like Prop 13, I think rent control is something that Californians will continue to chew on. So my apologies if I made it sound like they wouldn't be back.
No, I hear you. So a couple of fun questions. Big picture, national stuff affecting California and even locally. Who are your two top candidates to fill Kamala's seat when she leaves for DC?
Well, you, obviously, because straight white guys are tops on the list, buddy.
Exactly.
Okay,
any rumors, any thoughts, any ideas?
Yeah.
Anything you're willing to say?
I don't think you can look at it in a vacuum, because I think you have to take a step back. When Senator Feinstein ran 2 years ago for re-election, there were lots of folks who said, hey, Kevin De Leon's running and maybe he would be a better pick. But there were some calming of the waters by leading Democratic lights saying, don't shift horses in the middle of the stream. Trump's president. This is not a good time for this conversation. She's probably not going to do all 6 years. Gavin's going to be governor. Just, let it sit. And she had a relatively convincing win. It was the closest of her career, but she, it wasn't a close race. I have never thought Dianne Feinstein, who I've seen up close and still has it, but not quite as much of it as she used to have. We all lose steps. She's still all there, but the energy is dissimilar to some of her younger colleagues. I still believe that Senator Feinstein will, on her own timetable, choose a time before her 6-year term ends and choose to step off the stage, which means that Governor Newsom has not one, but 2 Senate appointments available to him in his first term, which is kind of the best thing you ever get. And it's a nice thing to have when your state is busy being shut down because of climate change and a pandemic and probably murder hornets like in 20 minutes, because if you had it may be that kind of term for it. So Governor Newsom is acutely aware of historical precedent and framing of narratives. And I believe that he will attempt with one or both of these seats to make a history an historical appointment. Right now, there are 3 members of the U.S. Senate who are African American: Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Tim Scott, who is a member of the Republican Party. And that's. Oh, by the way, the House of Representatives has 0 African American Republicans. As soon as the gentleman Will Hurd retires, he chose not to run for re-election in Texas. 435 members of Congress, 0 Black Republicans, 1 Black Republican in the Senate. I don't think that Gavin, in a state that is very pluralistic, will appoint a person of white to that seat, that first seat that is open. I don't know that he is going to replace a African American and Indian woman with a person who is an African American woman. If he does, his choices are somewhat limited because he will appoint someone of stature. Karen Bass, who is named in the vice presidential sweepstakes, is certainly a possibility, though I would argue that actuarial tables work in her disfavor. She is in her mid-60s. And when you appoint somebody to the Senate, you generally want to have them sit around there for 3, 4, 5 terms so they can build up some seniority. I think if Attorney General Javier Becerra was 10 years younger, he would be the prohibitive favorite to be appointed to that seat, but he's in his early 60s. And I would look at our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, as the first Latino from California in the US Senate would be something, especially if in a relatively short period of time before, say, Gavin Newsom was running for re-election, his second appointment could be a qualified woman in the state of California to serve replacing Senator Feinstein on her timetable if and when she chooses to step off the stage. And I would think that somebody like Mayor Libby Schaaf of Oakland would be a possibility, along with any number of people from the California State Senate or State Assembly or members of Congress. I'm sure the lobbying would be epic. Governor Newsom has not called me and told me what he's going to do. He is being lobbied quite heavily by, I hear, everybody for the spot. And most people are doing themselves a disservice by doing that exact lobbying. He's got possibly two historic appointments coming up, and I believe both of them will be historic. I think Scott Wiener would be a very interesting choice to make, the first out gay senator from the state of California. It's a fun choice, and I hope he and his advisors are having a hell of a lot of time looking through the old school Mission Impossible, not Tom Cruise Mission Impossible, but the old school Mission Impossible cards, looking at this one going, maybe, not for this mission, maybe. It's a great parlor game, and it has consequences and reverberations for our country and our society.
You got through all that without a Bogdanovich vote joke. I mean, so there's no chance he's going to try to sell it. Next question.
By the way, Bogdanovich was the filmmaker. Blagojevich.
I'm sorry, Blagojevich. I'm sorry. I was originally born in Chicago.
By the way, you're not allowed to make that joke anymore, as our great and dear leader, President Trump, has pardoned Rod Blagojevich, who is now,
of course,
magic or something
like that. So, okay, we got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Two quick hitters. Board of Supervisors going to work a little better together if we got Marjan and Myrna at the table. I think those are basically the two newbies, right? The two switches. I mean, that's a little bit.
I think that if that's who it is, whether it's Marjan or Connie, I do think that women tend to do a little bit better at figuring out how to run things than men, because collaboration comes a little bit more intuitively to them. Thank God. I don't think the fundamental makeup of the board changes whatsoever. Right now, you have 9 or 10 people who self-identify as progressive or fall into that camp. And you have Catherine Stephanie, who sits over there and waves. She might get a new person or two with whom to hang out. I believe that Myrna Melgar will work with everybody, because that's been who she has been, at least until the first knife fight over who's going to be president of the Board of Supervisors, which is going to be a fun question. I don't think the board changes substantially. I don't think the mayoral board relationship changes substantially. I think the new personalities probably help.
Cool. I'm not seeing a lot of other questions pop up here. Maybe we'll throw a final one your way, a curveball. Here it comes, Alex. You ready? Is Trump going to run in 2024?
Oh, it's hard to run for president of the United States from Rikers Island or Moscow. That's my hopeful answer.
What if I said Trump? Donald Jr. could run. There you go. He might be in Saudi Arabia at that point. So, you know.
Or rehab. Check the video. Ivanka's the most likely one. Hell, if Tiffany ran, we all might throw her a sympathy vote because she has to be part of that dumb family. I'm looking forward to waking up someday, opening up the newspaper and thinking, that's funny, I haven't heard anything coming out of the White House in like 3 days that, captures my attention. That will be such a relief. I mean, for those of you who don't know me, I'm 28 years old, and look at what the last 4 years have done to me. This is madness.
I had a full head of hair too, man. Exactly. I hear you.
Just 4 years ago. Again, everybody, protecttheresults.com. It's worth going to look at. At the very least, you'll know where to avoid traffic issues that are coming up. But it's a great place to invest a little bit of your time in democracy, should it come to that.
I appreciate that. I think we're at our hour. We're going to let you go, Alex. Thank you so much. Again, I want to thank our, hang on, I got to do my
I'd like to thank one of our sponsors, the law firm of Rubin, Junius, and Rose. They are expert in land use and lawn sprinkler maintenance.
Absolutely. That's our new division. And again, and thanks to Allhouse Deaton and Seagate as well for sponsoring this event. And you, of course, Alex, for making the time. And we all really enjoyed it as always. You're one of the best. And thank you for sharing your morning with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
All right. Take care, guys. Everybody. Thank you.